I found my husband on a steamy video call with his mistress. She's a pathetic, ridiculous slob, but it's convenient for me to stay with her, he told her. I just smiled, because the idiot never imagined that my revenge for all his humiliations was already in motion. The day she discovered the affair, Emily carefully closed the front door, carrying the grocery bags she had bought, planning to surprise Mark with a special dinner. There was something in the air, something that made her skin crawl. Down the hall, from his second-floor study, she heard her husband's voice. But he wasn't alone. There were laughs, low voices, and flirty giggles that they didn't bother to hide. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step a heavy beat in her ears. From the shadows of the hallway she could see the study door was ajar. Mark was in front of his computer with an expression of excitement Emily hadn't seen on him in years. On the screen, an attractive young woman played with her hair, casting flirtatious glances as she laughed at something he had said. "Honey, today is our anniversary. Where are we going?" the woman on the screen asked in a sweet voice. Mark leaned back in his chair and burst out laughing. "Of course, Jessica. You and I have a lot to celebrate, my love. This will be unforgettable, not like what I have here at home." His tone turned sour as he noticed Emily's figure peeking through the doorway. Without trying to hide his contempt, he shot her a venomous look. "What are you doing there, you disgusting fat slob? Can't you see I'm busy with a woman who's a total 10? He spat, his face twisted in a sneer of disgust. Emily felt the air turn thick, heavy, but she said nothing. She kept her gaze fixed on him, as if she were looking at something distant, something beyond that moment. Mark stood up abruptly, crossed the space between them, and grabbed her arm roughly. "Come here," he ordered, dragging her toward the screen, as if he wanted Jessica to enjoy the show. "Look at this," he said with a cruel smile, pointing to the screen. "This is Jessica. See her? Beautiful, elegant, young. She will give me children, not like you. You're a useless waste of space. You can't even move in bed. That's why you can't get pregnant." The impact of his words landed on Emily like an invisible blow, but she didn't let him see it. Outwardly, her face remained expressionless, but inside, something began to break. Or perhaps, to build. Mark let her go with a slight shove, and settled back in front of the computer, as if the whole episode were nothing more than a passing annoyance. Get out of here. I don't want to see you snooping around when I'm talking to Jessica, the future mother of my children. Out of my sight." Emily took a step back, then another, until her figure disappeared from the room. Mark turned his attention back to Jessica, completely ignoring his wife's presence in the house. She went downstairs calmly, her hands clenched into fists that trembled slightly. She left the bags in the kitchen with a mechanical movement and went to the bathroom. Locked in that small space, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. There were no tears, no screams, just a silence that filled every corner of her being. In that silence, Emily made a decision. Her mind was no longer a whirlwind of uncontrolled emotions. It was an orderly, cold, and calculating space. Her calm was her best weapon. Mark didn't know it, but he had just lit a spark that would consume him. She was not weak. Not anymore. That night, while Mark laughed in his study and planned his perfect future with Jessica, Emily began to mentally write the first chapter of her plan. She wouldn't just confront him. She would disarm him, piece by piece, until he had nothing left. And she would do it with a smile. The tension in the air was as palpable as the echo of the laughter coming from upstairs. And in that instant, Emily understood that pain was not her enemy, but her ally. The next day, Emily got up early, long before the sun began to rise. The house was shrouded in a silence that seemed as fragile as the facade of her marriage. As she made coffee, she heard Mark coming down the stairs. He was barefoot, but his presence was as heavy as a slamming door. Without looking at her, he went straight to the refrigerator, opened the door abruptly, and took out a bottle of water. Emily watched him from the kitchen in silence. Mark had always believed that silence was her submission, but that day, she was using it as a weapon. "I hope you don't think that by staying quiet, you're accomplishing anything," Mark said without turning around, as if he could feel her gaze on him. "Because you already know. You don't matter. You're only here because I don't have time to deal with changes right now." Emily took a sip of coffee and set the cup on the counter with a slow, deliberate movement. "Changes?" she asked without raising her voice. Mark turned to her, surprised by the calmness in her tone. There was no trace of pleading or anger, only curiosity. "Yes, changes," he replied, his posture hardening. "This marriage is a facade I maintain because it's convenient for me. So don't start getting ideas that this means anything. I have my own plans, and you, well, you just keep being what you've always been, an accessory I keep around for show." Emily held his gaze. "I understand," she said, without further explanation. Mark frowned, as if looking for something more in her words, but Emily turned around and began to wash the cup, as if the conversation had never happened. When Mark left for work, Emily took her laptop and sat at the dining room table. Her search began with something simple: how to open a bank account without your spouse knowing. After reading several articles, she decided that the first thing she needed was information. She reviewed their shared accounts, credit cards, and bank statements. She discovered something that made her pause for a moment. Mark had been making recurring transfers to an unknown account. The description said personal expenses, but the amounts were high, too high to be for everyday things. "So that's how you do it," she murmured to herself. A plan began to take shape in her mind, a scheme that promised to dismantle Mark from the inside out. But first, she needed allies. Emily knew that confronting him directly was not an option, at least not yet. Cunning was her only advantage. That night, when Mark returned, he was in a good mood, which was rare for him. Emily was in the living room reading a book. Mark dropped onto the couch across from her and turned on the TV, ignoring her completely. "I won't be here for dinner tomorrow," he announced without looking at her, as if she didn't deserve an explanation. Emily looked up from her book and watched him with a serene expression. "Anything important?" she asked, feigning interest. "I'm going out with Jessica," he replied brazenly, as if trying to provoke her. Emily felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine, but she didn't let it show. "It's her birthday. I thought I'd take her to that expensive steakhouse downtown, the one you always wanted to go to," he added, delivering the final blow. "How thoughtful of you," Emily said, returning to her book. Mark huffed, frustrated at not getting the reaction he expected, and focused on the TV show. That night, while Mark slept, Emily opened her computer again. She needed more than just information. She decided to look for a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone who understood exactly what she was facing. She found a firm that specialized in high-conflict divorces, and one of the profiles caught her eye. Helen Pierce, a retired attorney who offered consultations to women in situations of emotional abuse. The call was brief but intense. Helen didn't ask unnecessary questions. Her voice conveyed a mix of compassion and firmness. "The first thing you need is financial security. Can you redirect funds to a separate account without him noticing?" she asked. "I've already started," Emily replied. "Good. Now you need proof. Anything that incriminates him, messages, emails, photos, whatever demonstrates infidelity or abuse. Do you have anything?" Helen continued. "I have everything," Emily said with a conviction that surprised even herself. "Then you're closer than you think. Just remember, he must not suspect anything until you're ready to act," Helen concluded before hanging up. Emily closed the computer and lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the house was thicker than ever. In that solitude, a controversial thought crossed her mind. Would it be enough to dismantle him legally? Or did he deserve something more? Something that would leave a permanent mark, a lesson he would never forget. As the clock struck midnight, Emily smiled for the first time in a long time. It wasn't a smile of happiness, but of certainty. Mark thought she was weak, a disposable accessory in his life. But he would soon discover how wrong he was. Emily woke up early, her thoughts as methodical as the plan she had begun to map out. Every detail mattered, every move had to be perfectly calculated. That day, Mark had shamelessly announced that he would not be home for the evening, a gift-wrapped opportunity for someone like Emily, who now saw opportunities where she once only saw pain. As he got ready in front of the mirror, Emily watched from the bathroom doorway. Mark was wearing a shirt she had bought him on some past anniversary, as if to accentuate the irony of his disdain. He checked his reflection with satisfaction, ignoring his wife's presence. "Don't wait up for me," Mark said, his tone dripping with contempt as he adjusted his watch. "Is it a work meeting?" Emily asked with a calm that almost seemed like indifference. Mark let out a dry laugh and looked at her in the mirror, not bothering to turn around. "What do you think?" "It's Jessica. I told you yesterday, don't tell me you're losing your memory too. Today's her birthday, and I'm going to make sure it's an unforgettable day for her. Not like the mediocre anniversaries you used to organize." Emily didn't respond, but her hands trembled slightly before she hid them in her pockets. She watched Mark leave the room, but not before he delivered one last blow. "Oh, and don't even think about calling me. I need peace, not your whining." The front door closed with a slam, and the sound seemed to seal a pact. Emily took a deep breath. She couldn't afford to be carried away by hatred, at least not now. Everything had to be under control. She waited 15 minutes, then grabbed her purse. She had planned this moment since the night before. She went down to the garage and got into her car, making sure to keep a safe distance as she followed Mark through the city streets. Each red light was a pause to reflect on how she had gotten to this point. Each unexpected turn was a confirmation of how little she really knew the man who had once promised to love her. Mark arrived at an exclusive restaurant downtown. Emily parked on a side street, careful not to lose sight of him as he got out of the car. She saw him open the entrance door with a rehearsed confidence, his perfect smile, his self-assured posture. At a table in the back, Jessica was already waiting. She wore a red dress that left nothing to the imagination. The way they looked at each other made Emily's stomach churn. She discreetly entered, found a seat at the bar nearby, and started recording. Her hands trembled at first, but she soon found her stability. Mark offered Jessica a gift, a small box that she opened with excitement. It was a diamond necklace. Emily couldn't hear the conversation from her position, but she could read their lips well enough. "It's perfect, my love. You're so generous," Jessica said as she leaned in to kiss Mark. Emily couldn't help but remember how Mark had denied her money for medical treatments when they were trying to have children. "We don't need more unnecessary expenses," he had said back then. Now, in front of her, she saw him lavishly spending on another woman. The tightness in her chest transformed into a steely determination. She continued recording as the couple made a toast. Mark's smile was that of a man who believed himself to be untouchable. But Emily knew something he didn't. His kingdom was about to crumble. She decided to risk a little more. She left the bar and headed to the restroom, which happened to be near the table where Mark and Jessica were. She walked past them with her head down, but close enough to catch a fragment of their conversation. "And I don't know how much longer I can stand that woman," Mark was saying, clearly referring to Emily. His tone was casual, as if he were talking about a broken object he planned to discard. "Then why don't you just divorce her already?" Jessica asked, impatience hidden behind her smile. Hiding behind a pillar, Emily held her breath. "Because I don't want to lose a single cent," Mark replied, his voice cold and calculating. He then took Jessica's hand and kissed it. "But soon everything will be ready, and you'll be the only one in my life." Emily clenched her fists. At that moment, she knew she was not just facing an unfaithful man, but someone who had planned to reduce her to nothing. Her plan was no longer just revenge. It was a matter of survival. She returned to her car and allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of contained rage, of an urgent need for justice. She started the engine and left the place with a certainty. That would be the last time Mark humiliated her. When she got home, she reviewed the footage she had recorded. Every image, every word, was another piece of a puzzle she was patiently assembling. That night, Emily made a list of everything she would need to destroy Mark. Not just legal evidence, but allies, people who could help ensure his downfall was absolute. The woman who had entered that restaurant as a shadow was now a gathering storm. Mark didn't know it, but he had unleashed something he could not stop. The real battle was about to begin, and Emily had no intention of losing. The next day, Emily spent the morning in front of the bathroom mirror, contemplating her reflection as if searching for answers. She was aware that Mark would be back soon. For what she was about to do, she needed to maintain control. Every word, every gesture had to be perfect. The plan didn't just consist of gathering evidence, it also required playing the part of the naive, submissive wife, the one Mark took for granted. When she heard Mark's car pull into the driveway, she prepared herself. She went downstairs with calm steps, making sure her expression revealed nothing. She found him in the living room, checking his phone as he dropped his keys on the table. His shirt was unbuttoned, and he smelled of a perfume that was clearly not hers. Emily suppressed the revulsion she felt, and gave him a faint smile. "Mark," she said, softening her voice to avoid arousing suspicion, "I was thinking, this year, I haven't planned anything for my birthday. But my friends decided to throw me a party. I thought we could go together. It would be nice to share something, don't you think?" Mark looked up from his phone, raising an eyebrow as if Emily's words were some kind of joke. His eyes scanned her figure from top to bottom, and his sneer of contempt quickly appeared. "You really think I'm going to go out with you?" he asked, not bothering to hide the mocking tone in his voice. She felt her chest tighten, but she remained calm. Mark stood up and walked toward her, gesturing as if explaining something obvious to a child. "Look at yourself, Emily. Have you seen yourself in a mirror?" he said, stopping in front of her with a cruel smile. "You're a disaster. Fat. Sloppy. Do you think anyone wants to see me in public with you? It would be like going out with a beached whale. Honestly, you embarrass me. I don't even know how you can go out in public without feeling ridiculous." Each word was like a knife stabbing into her, but Emily didn't look away. It was as if her body had learned to absorb the pain, transforming it into something deeper, sharper. She let him continue, aware that each insult was not just an offense, but a confirmation of who the man she shared her home with truly was. Mark returned to the sofa and picked up his phone, as if the conversation was over. Emily remained standing, motionless, her hands clenched at her sides. Finally, she broke the silence. "I understand," she said in a serene voice, surprising him. Mark glanced up briefly, but finding no trace of confrontation in her, he ignored her again. "Perfect. Then do me a favor and don't bother me with nonsense like this again." "I have more important things to do," Mark replied as he sent a text. Emily left the living room and went upstairs. When she reached her room, she closed the door and let her breath catch. Mark's words echoed in her mind, not as a lament, but as a mantra that reinforced her determination. She had played her part perfectly, and Mark, blinded by his arrogance, hadn't seen what was brewing. Later, while Mark was on the phone in his study, Emily checked the calendar on her computer. She knew that on that same day, she had a scheduled meeting with her friends. But what Mark didn't know was that it wouldn't be just any meeting. Lucy, her closest friend, had arranged a get-together with other women who had gone through similar situations. Among them was Helen, the retired lawyer Emily had contacted days before. When she arrived at the cafe where they were meeting, Emily noticed that Lucy was already waiting. Her friend's look was one of concern but also of support. "Are you sure about this?" Lucy asked as they both sat down. Emily nodded firmly. "This isn't just about what he's done to me. It's what he continues to do, and what he could keep doing if I don't do something," she replied. Lucy nodded, though the sadness in her eyes was evident. The meeting was more productive than Emily had imagined. Helen provided her with a detailed list of documents she needed to gather, including bank statements, incriminating messages, and any evidence of verbal abuse. But the most important thing was what Helen told her before they parted ways. "Mark underestimates you and manipulates you. He thinks he has control because he's convinced you'll never take action. Use that to your advantage. But don't forget, men like him don't back down. If he suspects anything, he could become dangerous." Emily returned home with a mix of feelings. She was strengthened by the support of the women she had met, but also aware that time was running out. Every day that passed was another opportunity for Mark to discover what she was planning. That night, as he slept, Emily reviewed the messages she had recorded at the restaurant. Each insult, each derogatory word, was another piece of a puzzle that would soon be complete. The next day, Mark didn't even mention the conversation about the birthday party. He acted as if Emily didn't exist, which, paradoxically, gave her the freedom she needed to continue with her plan. He thought he had defeated her, but Emily knew the real game was just beginning. The next day, Emily was sitting in the dining room, her gaze fixed on a book she wasn't really reading. She listened to the sound of Mark's footsteps as he went up and down the stairs, as if he were restless. It was rare to see him like this. Usually, when he was home, he would lock himself in his study or stay in front of the TV, ignoring her completely. But that day, there was something different. He seemed nervous, distracted, as if looking for something he couldn't find. She closed the book and stood up calmly, heading towards the kitchen. From there, she could hear Mark talking softly on the phone, but she couldn't make out the exact words. She forced herself to maintain a serene expression as she prepared a cup of tea, although inside she felt that something was shifting in the balance of the game she had been building. When Mark finished his call, he appeared in the kitchen, watching her with a calculating gaze. Emily pretended not to notice and continued stirring sugar into her cup. "What are you doing?" Mark asked, crossing his arms. "Making tea," she replied without turning around. Her voice was calm, bored. Mark remained silent for a moment, but his presence filled the room like a shadow. "I've noticed you're different lately," he finally said. Emily turned slowly, holding the cup in her hands. "Different in what way?" she asked, feigning innocence. Mark took a step towards her, his gaze scrutinizing her as if trying to read beyond her words. "I don't know. You seem calmer, quieter. As if you're plotting something," he said with a mocking smile. Emily allowed herself a small laugh. "Mark, what could I possibly be plotting?" she responded, making a theatrical gesture of disbelief. She walked to the table and sat down, taking a sip of her tea. He stayed where he was, watching her with narrowed eyes. "I don't know, but I know you, Emily. You're so predictable that when you change, even a little, it's impossible not to notice." Emily put the cup down on the table and looked him directly in the eyes. There was a glint of defiance in her gaze, but she softened it with an almost timid smile. "Mark, I'm not plotting anything. If I've been calmer, it's because I'm trying to accept everything, to accept how things are between us." Emily stood up slowly, as if wanting to show she had nothing to hide. She took a few steps toward him, closing the distance between them. "I want you to know that despite everything, I'm still your wife. And even though I know you have Jessica, I love you, Mark. I can't help it. That's why I want to ask you, don't leave her." Mark stood motionless, his expression shifting from surprise to disbelief, and then to uncontrolled laughter. "Are you crazy?" he exclaimed, bringing a hand to his face as he continued to laugh. "What the hell are you saying to me?" Emily looked at him with a mix of vulnerability and determination. Every word she said was measured, every gesture part of the act. "I just want you to be happy," she said with a cracking voice. "And if Jessica makes you happy, I don't want to stand in the way. But I also want you to remember that I'm still here. I'm your wife. Maybe I can give you what you're looking for." Mark stopped laughing and looked at her with an expression that wavered between contempt and amusement. He stepped toward her, leaning in close enough for their faces to be at the same level. "Do you hear yourself? You're pathetic, Emily. A pathetic, desperate slob. You have no idea how ridiculous you look right now." Emily lowered her gaze, allowing tears to well up in her eyes but not letting them fall. It was crucial that she appeared affected, but not broken. "I don't care if you think that of me," she replied in a trembling voice. "I just want you to know that despite everything, I'm still the same woman who loved you from the beginning." Mark let out a bitter laugh and shook his head. "The same woman? No, Emily. What you are is a piñata, a hollow thing stuffed with, you know. And the worst part is you still think you can compete with Jessica. Jessica, a woman who is not only beautiful but gives me what you never could. What's more, you're a disaster even in bed. If you were a little more like her, maybe I wouldn't be looking for what I need somewhere else." Emily clenched her fists, hiding them behind her back so he wouldn't notice. Each word was like a blow, but she knew she had to resist. This moment, this exchange, was necessary for what was to come. "You're right, Mark," she finally said, lifting her gaze to his. "I can't compete with Jessica, but that doesn't mean I don't want to try." Mark stared at her, as if trying to understand if she was serious or if it was all a joke. Then he shook his head and left the kitchen without another word. Emily watched him go, allowing herself a sigh when she heard his study door close. The calm on her face vanished as soon as she was alone. She placed both hands on the table, leaning forward as she tried to regain control. Her whole body was shaking, but not from fear. It was rage, a rage she had learned to tame and transform into a tool. She knew Mark was suspicious, but she also knew that his own prejudices and arrogance blinded him. He believed she was weak, pathetic, incapable of anything beyond submission. And that was exactly what Emily needed him to believe. That night, while Mark was on the phone in his study, Emily locked herself in the bathroom with her laptop. She reviewed Jessica's messages, which she had managed to intercept, and noticed something interesting. Jessica was pressuring Mark to get a divorce. She had mentioned repeatedly that she didn't want to be the other woman anymore. This was new. Until now, Emily had assumed Jessica was content with her role, but no. She wanted more, and that meant Mark was under pressure. Emily smiled to herself as she closed the laptop. She had planted a seed of doubt in Mark's mind, and although that made him more dangerous, it also made him more vulnerable. Now she had to move more cautiously than ever. Time was running out, and every step she took had to be precise, calculated. She couldn't afford mistakes because she knew Mark wouldn't hesitate to crush her if he discovered what she was plotting. That night, as she lay next to him, pretending to sleep, Emily thought about the words she had said to him. "Don't leave Jessica." It was ironic because when she was done with him, Jessica wouldn't want to stay either. Mark didn't know it, but he was already trapped. His arrogance and contempt had blinded him, and that would be his downfall. The atmosphere in the house was thick, as if a storm were about to break at any moment. Mark had been more alert, more meticulous with his words and actions, as if suspecting something was moving beyond his control. Emily noticed it in the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, in the seemingly casual questions he dropped during conversations, trying unsuccessfully to get some answer that would reassure him. Emily was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Her movements were calculated, precise, like everything she had done in recent days. She heard Mark enter, and the sound of his footsteps stopped right at the kitchen threshold. She didn't need to turn around to know he was watching her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Emily didn't stop her task. She just shrugged slightly, maintaining a casual tone. "Nothing special. Just planning dinner." Mark leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. His gaze pierced through her, searching for any sign that she was hiding something. Emily felt it, but she didn't flinch. "I've noticed you've been weird lately," he insisted, as if trying to provoke her. Calmer, more self-assured. "That's not normal for you." Emily put the knife down on the cutting board and finally turned to face him. Her face was serene, but there was a glint in her eyes that Mark couldn't decipher. "Mark, does it really surprise you that I'm calm?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "After everything you've said to me, after everything you've done, what do you expect? That I keep crying? I think I've given you enough of that." Mark let out a bitter laugh, though there was some discomfort in his gesture. "I don't believe you. You're not as strong as you pretend to be, not after what you are, what you've become." Emily held his gaze, letting the silence speak for her. Finally, Mark shook his head in frustration and left the kitchen. Emily waited to hear his study door close before letting out a sigh. She knew she was playing with fire. Every word she said, every gesture, was a test of whether she could maintain control, but she was also aware that Mark was becoming more unpredictable. Her instinct told her that time was running out and that she needed to accelerate her plan. That night, while Mark slept, Emily took out her laptop and reviewed the file she had been meticulously building. It was a digital dossier with everything she needed to destroy him: messages, suspicious bank transfers, photographs of Mark with Jessica in public. But there was something else that worried her. As she reviewed the intercepted messages between Mark and Jessica, she found something that made her stop. Jessica had mentioned several times the possibility of moving in together, but Mark had responded with evasions. This wasn't new. What caught Emily's attention was a recent message. "If we don't do this soon, I'm not going to wait any longer. There's another man interested in me, and I'm not going to waste any more time." Emily smiled to herself. Jessica, just like Mark, was playing her own game, but this opened a door she hadn't considered before. If Jessica became a threat to Mark, she could use that to her advantage. The next morning, Emily decided to take the next step. She knew she had to stay close to Mark to keep him off guard, but she also needed to be one step ahead of him. When she saw him come downstairs, already dressed to leave, she greeted him with a smile she knew would unsettle him. "Will you be home for dinner tonight?" she asked as she placed 2 cups of coffee on the table. He stopped, looking at her suspiciously. "Why do you ask?" Emily pretended to be busy arranging the table. "I just thought we could have dinner together. It's been a while since we had a quiet evening." Mark let out a dry laugh. "I'm not in the mood for your desperate attempts to play the perfect wife." Emily remained calm, though inside she was torn between contempt and satisfaction that he continued to underestimate her. "I understand," she replied, letting a tone of sadness seep into her voice. "But if you change your mind, I'll be here." Mark said nothing more, grabbed his briefcase, and left the house. Emily watched him from the window, waiting until his car disappeared down the street before picking up her phone. She dialed the number she had saved under the name Lucy, though she knew it was Helen, the lawyer who was helping her plan every move. "I found something interesting," Emily said as soon as Helen answered. "Jessica is pressuring Mark to make decisions, and I think that could work in my favor." "That's good," Helen replied, her voice professional but understanding. "But you have to be careful. If he feels like he's losing control, he could become aggressive." "I know. I'm ready for anything." That afternoon, Emily decided to leave the house and head to the restaurant where Mark usually met Jessica. She had discovered they had a table reserved for that night. Her plan was simple but risky: show up unexpectedly to observe their dynamic up close. She knew this was dangerous, but she also knew she needed more evidence for the next step. When she arrived at the restaurant, she sat at a discreet table near the window. She wore a hat and dark glasses, trying to go unnoticed. She didn't have to wait long. Mark arrived first, and shortly after, Jessica appeared in a dress that left no doubt about her intentions. Emily watched them, discreetly recording with her phone as they talked. The tension between them was palpable. Jessica spoke quickly, her gestures nervous. Mark, on the other hand, looked uncomfortable, as if he didn't want to be there. "I can't keep waiting, Mark," Jessica said at one point, her voice loud enough for Emily to hear. "If you're not going to leave your wife, tell me now. I don't want to be the other woman anymore." Mark leaned toward her, lowering his voice, but Emily managed to catch a few words. "I can't do it now. Things are complicated. I need time." Jessica crossed her arms, frustrated. "You always need time. I'm tired of your excuses." Emily smiled to herself. She knew that this tension was her best ally. When Mark and Jessica left the restaurant, Emily stayed a few more minutes, reviewing the images and audio she had captured. Every piece of the puzzle was fitting together, but the final move was still missing. That night, when she returned home, Mark was there, sitting on the sofa with the TV on. Emily walked past him, feigning fatigue. "Did you have a good day?" Mark asked, without taking his eyes off the screen. "Normal, as always," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. Mark didn't press, and Emily went up to her room. She sat in front of her computer and began to organize everything she had. She knew the moment of confrontation was near, but she also knew that before that happened, she had to make sure Mark had no escape. He thought he had control, but he was about to find out how wrong he was. Emily set the table with obsessive attention to detail. She chose the most elegant dinnerware they owned, the same set they hardly ever used because Mark said it was too good for ordinary occasions. She lit a few candles and poured the wine he used to enjoy. Everything was calculated to convey a sense of normalcy, even intimacy, something that hadn't existed between them for years. Mark arrived late, as always. When he entered the house, his jacket was unbuttoned, and he was holding his phone. He didn't even glance at the beautifully set table. Emily greeted him with a smile, forcing herself not to show the weight of the tension she carried. "I waited for you for dinner," she said, trying to sound warm. Mark looked up and stared at her, as if evaluating whether it was worth staying. After a moment, he left his briefcase by the door and walked to the dining room. "I hope this isn't another one of your attempts to fix things," he said with a tone heavy with sarcasm as he sat in the head chair. Emily served the plates and placed a gift-wrapped box in the center of the table. Mark noticed the shiny wrapping paper and frowned. "What's that?" he asked, pointing at the box with disdain. "It's a gift for you," Emily replied, sitting across from him. Her voice was soft, but there was a glint in her eyes that Mark couldn't identify. He opened the box with a mix of curiosity and contempt. Inside, he found 2 plane tickets to Cancun. Just below, a plus-size bikini was carefully folded. Upon seeing it, Mark burst out laughing, leaning back in his chair as if he had just heard the best joke of his life. "What is this?" he asked between laughs, holding up the bikini with both hands. "Are you telling me you're going to wear this? Please, Emily, tell me you're not serious." Emily held his gaze, remaining calm despite the heat she felt rising in her face. "Yes, I bought it for myself. I thought we could go to Cancun together, relax, spend time as a couple." Mark dropped the bikini on the table and leaned toward her, resting his elbows with a mocking gesture. "As a couple? Emily, there is no couple here. I don't know what you've been imagining, but this is ridiculous. You really think you're going to wear this and I'm going to want to be with you? Look at yourself. You're huge. That bikini looks like a circus tent. I don't know whether to laugh or cry." Emily felt Mark's words were like blows, but she didn't let it show on her face. She took a deep breath and replied in a calm voice, "What matters isn't the outside, Mark, but the inside." Mark laughed again, this time louder. It was a cruel, hollow sound, devoid of any emotion other than contempt. "The inside? Please, Emily. The only thing that matters here is that you have nothing to offer, neither on the outside nor on the inside. You know what? I'd be doing you a favor if I signed you up for a gym. Zumba, Pilates, whatever. Maybe, just maybe, you'll find someone who can love you. Because I can't. I don't love you, Emily. You're like an empty piñata, stuffed with, well, you know." The last word hung in the air like a dagger. Emily felt her hands tremble under the table, but she clenched them tightly. She couldn't afford to lose control. Every insult, every humiliation, was another piece of the puzzle she was building. She had learned to turn pain into a weapon, and Mark, without knowing it, was handing it to her. "I understand how you feel, Mark," she finally said, looking at her own interlaced fingers on the table. "But I want you to know that despite everything, I still believe in us." Mark snorted and pushed the gift box aside as if it were trash. "Well, stop believing, because there is no us. There's me, and there's you. And let me be clear. I want nothing to do with you. I'm here because it's convenient, nothing more. If it weren't so complicated to get rid of you, I would have already done it." Emily held his gaze but said nothing. In her silence, there was a strength that Mark didn't understand, something that made him uncomfortable, though he wouldn't admit it. He stood up from the table and walked into the living room, leaving her alone with the remnants of the dinner. When she was sure Mark was busy on his phone, Emily picked up the bikini and the tickets. She went up to her room and stored them in the closet, not as a memory of humiliation, but as more evidence proof of the man Mark truly was. That night, while he slept, Emily reviewed the recordings from her hidden camera. She had installed a small device in the dining room that captured everything that happened there. Every insult, every gesture of contempt was documented. As she watched the video, a mix of sadness and determination filled her chest. She knew the end was near, but she also knew she had to hold on a little longer. Every step she took brought her closer to victory. The next morning, Mark acted as if nothing had happened. Emily watched him put on his tie in front of the mirror, thinking how blind he was. He believed he had broken her, that there was nothing left of the woman who once loved him. But what Mark didn't know was that this same woman had been reborn, stronger and more dangerous than he could ever imagine. Mark's routine was predictable, and Emily knew it. He left the house in the morning, returned in the evening, and in between, he lived a life he had carefully kept hidden, or so he thought. Emily had spent weeks observing, collecting every move, every slip-up, and now she had a plan as solid as a wall built with bricks of truth. But time was beginning to work against her. Mark was more alert, more cautious, as if sensing that something was out of place. That morning, Mark left early as usual. Emily waited until the sound of his car's engine faded completely before she got to work. She went to her room and opened the drawer where she kept her laptop and a folder full of documents. She reviewed each file with meticulous attention. She had everything she needed to bring Mark's life crashing down: financial records proving embezzlement from their joint accounts, photographs with Jessica, and most valuable of all, audio recordings in which he admitted he didn't want a divorce because it would cost him too much. Emily picked up her phone and dialed Helen's number. The lawyer answered almost immediately. "How are things going?" Helen asked, her usual tone of professionalism mixed with empathy. "I have almost everything ready, but there's something that worries me," Emily replied, trying to control the anxiety that was beginning to seep into her voice. "Mark has been suspicious. I can see it in the way he looks at me, in the questions he asks. I need to make sure he can't retaliate." Helen paused before answering. "The moment you confront Mark will be crucial. If he feels like he's losing control, he could react unpredictably. Do you have a safe place to go if things get complicated?" "Yes, I've already made the necessary arrangements, but I want everything to be perfect before I make the final move." Helen's voice was reassuring. "I trust you, Emily. You're doing everything right. Just remember, don't give him any sign that you're prepared. Stay calm, even if he provokes you." Emily hung up and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to slow her breathing. She knew Helen was right. Mark must not suspect that his world was about to collapse. Later, Emily decided to go to Mark's office. It wasn't something she usually did, but this time she had a clear motive. She wanted to confront him indirectly, to see how he would react. When she arrived, the receptionist looked at her in surprise. "Mrs. Miller, what can I help you with?" she asked with a tense smile. "I just wanted to surprise Mark. Is he in his office?" Emily replied casually. The receptionist hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, but he's in a meeting." Emily smiled and took a seat in the waiting area. She knew Mark wasn't in any meeting. She had tracked his location that morning and knew he was with Jessica at a nearby cafe. After waiting a few minutes, she stood up and walked toward Mark's office, ignoring the receptionist's protests. When she opened the door, she found exactly what she expected. The office was empty. She went to his desk and started looking through the papers. It didn't take her long to find something that made her stop. It was a prenuptial agreement she had never seen before. Emily read it carefully, feeling rage begin to boil inside her. Mark had prepared everything to ensure that if they ever divorced, she would get nothing. But what he didn't know was that this contract would be invalid against the evidence of abuse and financial misconduct she had accumulated. She put a copy of the document in her purse and left the office before anyone could stop her. As she drove back home, her mind was racing. This new discovery was another piece on the board, but it also confirmed that Mark was more prepared than she had imagined. The final confrontation would be riskier than she had anticipated. When Mark got home that night, Emily was waiting for him in the living room with a serene expression that hid everything she felt. "I went to your office today," she said, looking him directly in the eyes. Mark stopped in his tracks, his expression changing from surprise to anger in an instant. "What were you doing there?" he asked, his tone loaded with irritation. "I wanted to surprise you. I thought maybe we could have lunch together, but they told me you were in a meeting, although your office was empty." Mark frowned, trying to think of a quick excuse. "I was in a meeting outside the office. I don't understand why you're so interested in what I do." Emily held his gaze, challenging him with her calmness. "I just wanted to do something nice for us, but it seems that doesn't matter anymore." Mark snorted and dropped onto the sofa. "Stop acting like this is a normal marriage. You know as well as I do that this isn't working. Stop deluding yourself, Emily." She didn't respond, but her silence was more eloquent than any words. She stood up slowly and left the room, leaving him alone with his frustration. In her room, she opened the folder where she had saved the prenup and added it to the file she was preparing. Mark was wrong if he thought she was blind. She saw him more clearly than ever, and soon he would know it too. That night, Emily lay next to Mark, pretending to sleep while her mind kept working. She had come too far to stop now. The price of the truth would be high, but she was willing to pay it. Mark still thought he was in control, but the board was changing, and Emily was the one moving the pieces. Emily prepared her next move with the precision of a surgeon. She had been accumulating evidence and weaving her strategy for weeks, but she knew the next step required a bit more subtlety. Mark was more confident than ever, thinking he had reduced Emily to an insignificant figure in his life, but she was far from the shadow he thought he controlled. It was a quiet morning when Emily sat at the dining room table with a cup of coffee in her hand, waiting for Mark to come down. She had planned every word she would say, every gesture she would use to disguise her true intention. When Mark appeared, his hair still messy and his face marked by sleep, Emily smiled at him kindly. "Mark, I need to talk to you," she said in a soft voice, placing her cup on the table. He sat across from her, raising an eyebrow with an expression of boredom. "What is it now, Emily? Another one of your useless complaints?" She ignored his tone and leaned slightly toward him. "I've been thinking, maybe I need some time for myself. I feel like I've forgotten who I am, what I want. I think a trip would do me good, something that would allow me to clear my head. Maybe when I come back, everything will be different." Mark looked at her for a moment, evaluating whether what she was saying had any hidden meaning. Then he burst out laughing, leaning back in his chair. "Do you really think I care what you do?" he asked, laughing with contempt. "For all I care, you can go to the ends of the earth. Better yet, go and stay there. That way you leave me space to be with Jessica, my true love." Mark's words hit with the force of a hammer, but Emily didn't let him see it. She had anticipated exactly this response and was prepared for it. "I figured," she replied, striving to maintain a neutral tone. "But I thought you could at least pretend to care." Mark shook his head, still smiling. "Emily, how many times do I have to tell you? There's nothing between you and me. The only thing you do here is take up space. And if you leave, believe me, I won't miss you. Jessica gives me everything I need. Well, you're nothing." Emily looked away, pretending that Mark's words hurt her more than they actually did. Inside her, rage and determination mixed into a dangerous cocktail, but she managed to control it. This moment was crucial, and she couldn't afford to fail. "Thanks for being honest, Mark," she finally said, getting up from the table. "I'll be leaving in a few days. I hope you enjoy your time alone." Mark didn't reply. He simply got up, took his phone, and left the room. Emily watched him from the window as he got into his car and drove away. There was no trace of remorse in his behavior, and that only fueled her determination. Emily spent the rest of the day packing, though not for the trip she had told Mark about. In reality, she had booked a room at a nearby hotel from where she could continue monitoring him without raising suspicion. She knew that with her out of the house, Mark would feel free to act carelessly, which would give her the perfect opportunity to gather more evidence. That night, as they ate dinner in silence, Emily watched him carefully. Mark seemed relaxed, even satisfied, as if his life plan was unfolding exactly as he wanted. Emily decided to break the silence. "I've booked my flight for this Friday," she said, avoiding his gaze. Mark looked up from his plate with a mocking smile. "Perfect. The sooner you leave, the better for me." "Have you told anyone else about your great escape?" he asked, emphasizing the words with sarcasm. "Just Lucy. She's happy I'm taking some time for myself." Mark nodded, clearly uninterested. Emily felt a mix of frustration and satisfaction. She knew that every comment of his only reinforced Mark's confidence in his control of the situation, and that was exactly what she needed. On Friday morning, Emily left the house with a small suitcase and took a taxi to the hotel she had booked. From there, she set up her computer to access the cameras she had installed in the house, making sure Mark had no idea he was being watched. It didn't take long for Mark's true nature to surface. That same night, Jessica arrived at the house with a bottle of wine and a dress that left little to the imagination. Emily watched the scene from her screen, feeling the rage grow inside her. Mark greeted her with a broad smile, hugging her as if she were the queen of his world. "Finally, we have the house to ourselves," Mark said, leading her to the sofa. "No more Emily haunting the place like a ghost." Jessica laughed, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "Do you think she's realized you're never coming back to her?" she asked, sitting next to him. Mark shrugged. I don't care what she thinks. All that matters is that as long as she's out of my way, everything will be perfect." Emily closed the laptop and took a deep breath. She had come so far and knew the end was near. Mark had no idea what was coming, and that gave her an advantage she wasn't willing to waste. As she lay back on the hotel bed, she mentally reviewed her plan. She had gathered enough evidence to destroy him legally, financially, and socially. And though she knew the final confrontation would be difficult, she was ready to face it. Because at the end of the game, it wouldn't be Mark who came out victorious. It would be her. Months had passed since Emily left the house she had shared with Mark. On the surface, it seemed she was taking time for herself, a break from the life she had led for years. But in reality, she was building something much more profound, a new version of herself. Emily settled into a small apartment near a park where she began to walk every morning. At first, her steps were slow and painful, but over time her body began to respond. The routine became her sanctuary. Each mile she walked was a victory, not just against her body, but against Mark's words that still echoed in her mind. "You're a piñata, a fat slob stuffed with nothing." Those phrases were her fuel, not to prove anything to him, but to prove to herself that she could be more, much more. The change wasn't immediate, but every day was a step forward. Emily joined a gym, a place she had avoided her whole life for fear of judgment. At first, she felt out of place, but soon she found her rhythm. Zumba, yoga, weights, it was all part of her transformation, not just physical but emotional. Her body began to change. The curves Mark had despised became firm. Her face regained its glow, and her eyes reflected something she hadn't felt in years: confidence. It wasn't just about her appearance. Emily was learning to value herself in a way she never had before. She also began to explore her intellect, enrolling in creative writing classes and starting a small online business that made her financially independent. Everything Mark had tried to destroy was being reborn like a phoenix rising from the ashes. The months of distance allowed Emily to perfect her plan. From her computer, she monitored what was happening at the house. Mark was still with Jessica, but things weren't as perfect as he imagined. Emily watched them argue, watched Jessica demand more than he could give. Mark's expenses had increased considerably, and the joint accounts he thought he controlled were nearly empty. Emily had learned to divert small amounts to a secret account, ensuring that when the time came, she would have total control. One afternoon, while checking her email, she found an invitation to the wedding of a mutual friend of hers and Mark's. It was the perfect opportunity to return after so long. She knew her presence would be a shock he wouldn't expect. When the day of the wedding arrived, Emily dressed in an elegant red dress that accentuated her transformed figure. Her hair, now long and shiny, cascaded over her shoulders. Her heels clicked loudly on the church floor as she walked to her seat. The looks of astonishment came quickly. No one expected to see Emily like this. Mark was there, of course, with Jessica by his side. When he saw her, his jaw nearly hit the floor. Jessica, on the other hand, frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the attention Emily was receiving, but Emily didn't let herself be intimidated. She walked confidently to her place, ignoring the stares and whispers. She knew she was in control. At the end of the ceremony, Mark approached her. There was something in his expression that mixed disbelief and anger. "Emily, you look different," he said, trying to sound casual but failing to hide his surprise. She smiled calmly, as if not noticing the confusion on his face. "Thanks, Mark. I've been taking care of myself." Mark looked her up and down, as if trying to understand what had happened. But before he could say anything more, Jessica appeared, grabbing his arm. "Aren't you going to introduce me?" she said, her tone trying to be friendly but filled with jealousy. Emily extended her hand with a smile. "I don't think that's necessary. I'm Emily, Mark's wife. Well, for now at least." The comment landed like a bomb. Mark opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. Jessica, for her part, tried to maintain her composure, but her eyes betrayed her. "Mark and I need to talk, but don't worry, Jessica, I won't take up much of your time," Emily added, looking directly at Mark. Mark had no choice but to follow her. He led her to a secluded corner of the reception hall where he finally found his voice. "What are you doing here?" he asked, trying to sound angry, but there was a note of nervousness in his tone. "Attending a friend's wedding." "Same as you," Emily replied calmly. "Don't give me that. What do you want?" Emily stepped a little closer, reducing the distance between them. "I just wanted to remind you of something, Mark. I'm not the woman you left behind. And when this is all over, when we finally face the consequences of your decisions, I want you to know that there will be nothing you can do to stop me." Mark took a step back, as if Emily's words had physically struck him. "You have nothing on me," he said, but his voice lacked its previous confidence. Emily looked him directly in the eyes with a smile that was not of mockery, but of certainty. "That's what you think." Without another word, Emily turned and walked back to the reception, leaving Mark alone, confused and for the first time, afraid. He knew he had ignited the spark of something much bigger than himself, and now there was no turning back. Emily was back in town. Her return had not been discreet, and that was intentional. She had spent months in silence, planning, transforming, but now it was time to make some noise. Every step she took was charged with a determination Mark had never seen in her. This new version of Emily wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, invincible. The impact of her appearance at the wedding had begun to manifest. Mark, always so sure of his control over everything, was now restless. Emily knew this because she had received a text from him that morning. It was short but revealing. "We need to talk, now." Emily didn't reply immediately. Instead, she spent the morning reviewing the final details of her plan. The dossier she had prepared against Mark was ready. Proof of his embezzlement, compromising messages with Jessica, documents showing his attempts to strip her of any legal rights. Everything was perfectly organized. When she finally replied to Mark's message, she did so with a simple phrase, "See you at the house at 7. It was a calculated provocation. She knew Mark hated feeling controlled, and by setting the time and place, she was marking her position of power. At 7 o'clock sharp, Emily was sitting on the living room sofa, waiting. She had lit a couple of candles and poured 2 glasses of wine, not because she wanted to soften the atmosphere, but because she wanted to keep him off balance. When Mark arrived, he seemed tense. He walked in quickly, closing the door with more force than necessary. "What the hell are you doing, Emily?" he asked immediately, not bothering to hide his irritation. Emily lifted her wine glass and took a sip before answering. "I'm just making sure you get the message, Mark." "What message?" he said, frowning as he sat across from her. Emily placed the glass on the table and looked him directly in the eyes. "The message that this is over, you and me. But more importantly, the message that I'm not walking away from this empty-handed." Mark let out a dry laugh, but there was something nervous in his tone. "What are you talking about? You think you have any chance against me? You're nothing but a scorned woman who couldn't keep me interested. You have nothing, Emily. Nothing." She smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was cold, calculating. "Nothing? Let me show you something." Emily stood up and took a thick folder from her purse, placing it on the table. She opened it and began sliding documents toward Mark. Bank statements showing suspicious transfers, photographs of him with Jessica, messages in which he admitted his intention to manipulate their joint accounts to leave her with nothing. Mark took the papers, at first with disdain, but his expression changed as he read them. The confidence that had always characterized him began to crumble. "This doesn't prove anything," he said, but his voice had lost its strength. "It's proof enough for a lawyer and a judge, Mark. But there's more." Emily took out her phone and played an audio recording in which Mark was talking to Jessica about his intention to get rid of Emily cleanly, making sure she couldn't claim anything in the divorce. His voice echoed in the room, raw and cruel. Mark jumped to his feet, throwing the papers on the table. "You recorded our conversations?" he yelled, his face red with rage. Emily remained calm, sitting and watching him as if he were a child throwing a tantrum. "Everything is documented, Mark. Everything. And I have more copies, so don't try anything stupid. This is not negotiable." Mark was silent for a moment, breathing heavily. Finally, he sank back onto the sofa, running a hand through his hair. "What do you want, Emily?" he asked, his voice lower, almost defeated. She watched him for a moment before answering. "I want the divorce." and I want what's mine. Nothing more, nothing less." Mark looked at her in disbelief, as if he couldn't believe the woman in front of him was the same one he had belittled for so long. "And what if I say no?" he finally said, with a weak attempt to regain some control. Emily leaned toward him, her expression hard as steel. "Then I'll take it to court. And believe me, Mark, when all this comes out, you won't just lose your money. You'll lose your reputation, your job, everything. Do you want to risk that?" The silence that followed was heavy. Mark knew he was cornered, and that enraged him more than anything. But he also knew Emily was right. "How much do you want?" he asked, his tone bitter. "Half of everything," Emily replied without hesitation. Mark clenched his fists but said nothing more. He had lost. Emily stood up, gathering her documents. "I'll give you 1 week to sign the papers. After that, it becomes a legal matter. You decide how you want this to end." Without waiting for a response, she walked to the door. Before leaving, she stopped and looked at him one last time. "And by the way, Mark, I hope you and Jessica are very happy. But don't be surprised if she also finds someone more interesting when she realizes you're not as invincible as you thought." The door closed behind her, leaving Mark alone with the evidence of his defeat scattered on the table. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant not to have control, and the feeling terrified him. Mark's world collapsed faster than he ever imagined. After Emily filed for divorce and secured half of everything he had accumulated, he had no choice but to concede. But the financial loss was just the beginning. Emily didn't just take assets and money, she also took his reputation. With the evidence she had collected, she managed to expose him as a disloyal and abusive man. The consequences came swiftly. Mark lost his job, his most important friendships, and worse, Jessica's admiration. Jessica had been a ghost since things started going wrong. For weeks, she barely responded to Mark's messages, and their encounters, once full of laughter and flirtation, had become cold and awkward. Until one day, in the small apartment Mark had moved into after losing his house, Jessica finally showed up to confront him. "Jessica, I promise things will get better. I just need a little more time to recover," Mark said, trying to sound confident as they sat in the tiny, cluttered living room. Jessica crossed her legs, looking at him with a mix of pity and disdain. "Recover? How?" she replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Mark, have you looked at yourself? You have nothing. No job, no money, not even your house. What am I supposed to do with you?" Mark tried to take her hand, but Jessica pulled it away quickly. "Jessica, don't leave me. You and I can start over. Just give me a chance." She laughed, but there was no joy in her laugh. "Start over? Mark, let's be clear. I was with you because you gave me a comfortable life, expensive restaurants, gifts, trips. Now you have nothing. What do you think I'm going to do? Live in this hole and support you while you try to rebuild your life? No, thanks. I'm not made for that." He stared at her, stunned. He had lost everything for Jessica, and now she was leaving him without any mercy. "You were with me for money?" he asked in disbelief. Jessica stood up, smoothing her dress. "Mark, sweetie, I was with you for the life you gave me. Now that you can't offer me that, you're useless to me. It's as simple as that." And with those words, Jessica walked out of his life forever. Meanwhile, Emily was living a transformation she had never imagined possible. She had taken control of her life in a way that once seemed unattainable. With the money she received from the divorce, she opened a floral design business, something she had always dreamed of doing. The shop was tastefully decorated and soon became a success, attracting clients from all over the city. But Emily's greatest achievement was not professional or financial. She had decided to adopt a baby, a little girl just 6 months old, who filled her life with an indescribable joy. Little Valentina, with her big, curious eyes, became the center of her world. Emily, who had been belittled for her inability to be a mother, now proved that motherhood was not limited by others' expectations. One day, while playing with Valentina in the garden of her new house, Emily heard the sound of a car parking in front of the entrance. She looked toward the gate and saw Mark. He looked gaunt, with wrinkled clothes and messy hair. He was a very different man from the one he had once been. His arrogance had vanished, replaced by a palpable desperation. Emily opened the door with Valentina in her arms, looking at him without any visible emotion. "What are you doing here, Mark?" she asked, her tone calm. Mark clasped his hands together as if begging. "Emily, please. I need to talk to you. Just give me a few minutes." She let him in, but didn't invite him to sit. She stood in front of him, with Valentina playing in her arms. "Emily, I made a mistake. I was an idiot. I should never have treated you the way I did. I realize now that you were the best thing I had. Jessica left me, and now I'm completely alone. I need you. Please, give me a second chance." Emily watched him in silence for a few seconds, letting his words hang in the air. "Now I'm the best thing you had?" she finally asked, her tone cold. "Before I was a piñata, remember? A disgusting wail. Now I'm your love? Is that what you're saying?" Mark knelt, tears in his eyes. "Please, Emily, I'm being sincere. I'll do anything to make it up to you. Just give me a chance." Emily let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "He who laughs last, laughs best, Mark. There's a God who sees everything, and I think you're finally getting what you deserve." He reached his hands out to her, but Emily stepped back, hugging Valentina. "I don't need your apology. I have no room for you in my life anymore. I'm happy now, something you tried to take from me for years, but what you didn't know is that I'm stronger than you ever thought." Mark lowered his head, defeated. Emily opened the door, gesturing for him to leave. "Go, Mark. This is the end for you and for me. Learn to live with your decisions, just as I learned to live with mine." Mark left the house without another word. When he turned to look back, he saw Emily close the door with determination. It was the final chapter of a story he had tried to control, but one that Emily had ended up writing in her own way. Inside her house, Emily looked at Valentina, who smiled without a care in the world. She knew she had made the right decisions. Life went on, and now it was hers, completely hers, to live as she had always deserved.